So this past year, a court case was brought against the Downers Grove Sperm Bank in Ohio. A couple chose a particular donor profile, and there was a clerical error. Whoops. And they have since had their daughter and love her beyond all things, but it just so happens that their mistaken donor was unexpectedly black, and therefore their daughter is biracial. The foundation of their court case is this. Now that they have a biracial daughter, they have to change everything. In her lawsuit, one of the parents said the sperm bank's error caused her to live with anxieties and uncertainty about her and Peyton's future. When the lawsuit was filed, she lived in Uniontown, Ohio, with a population less than 3,000. She described Uniontown as predominantly white and too intolerant to be a proper home for her daughter. Now, the thing that upsets me most about this case is not the mistake of the sperm bank, rather it's the reality that this wasn't an issue for them until now. Why was it okay to raise a Caucasian child in a predominantly white and intolerant community? Why is race something only non-white kids need to worry about? Why isn't it something we all raise our children to understand and question? Unfortunately, I think I know the answer. Because it's normal. Because we aren't called to question the things that work for us. If there's no dissonance, where is the impetus to change, to question, to grow? And if the community stays insular, the narrative is that white works, that if it's not broken, don't fix it. The brokenness becomes someone else's problem that we voyeur during the 10 o'clock news. This is our reality here in Long Island. Did you know, according to a recent study comparing rates of integration in different communities, Long Island ranks as the nation's most segregated suburb? Mr. Rust, the convener, shares the unspoken agenda of most little box councils or most little box school boards is to keep our town or our schools just the way they are for people just like us, whoever us happens to be. The result is that Long Island is highly divided by race and ethnicity. For black residents, Long Island is the most segregated suburb in America. This is our norm. Today we hear about Jesus' interaction with the Syrophenician woman. She's a Gentile, aka not Jewish, and she's also from the area of Tyre and Sidon, which is technically outside the boundaries of Israel. So she's an outsider in gender, in religion, and in race. And this is an interaction, frankly, that's painful to hear because Jesus outright calls this woman a dog and questions her right to God's mercy. It doesn't sound like the Jesus we know and love, and frankly, I'm a big fan of skipping over this whole story, or at least I was, until I read an essay by Reverend David Hansen. Rather than shying away from the story, he meets it head on. He writes, "This, I think, is the great lesson of the Syrophenician woman. It teaches us the dynamics of racism, of how even the best of humanity, the incarnation himself, can get caught up in systems of oppression in a culture of supremacy. You see, as a good Jew, Jesus would have been raised to thank God daily that he was born a Jew and not a Gentile, a man and not a woman. Jesus could not help but become entangled by such a sexist and racist snare. It was the norm. It was never challenged, until now. Until this brave woman who stands up for healing for her daughter. See, being caught in such evil does not make one an overt racist. It is what happens in the moments afterward that make that determination. How we respond when we're confronted with stories of those who are oppressed reveal who we truly are. Do we continue to ignore or deny these realities of oppression? Mock them? Continue to brush them aside as dogs, or do we, like Jesus, do the miraculous and listen to them, be changed by the power of the truth that they are speaking? When this woman in boldness confronts Jesus and his racist, sexist slur, Jesus listens and hears. It is the only time recorded in the Gospels in which Jesus changes his mind. Jesus is convicted. A moment before, she was but a dog to him, and in the next, the scales fall from his eyes as he listens to her and sees her for what she truly is, a woman of great faith, a moral exemplar, his teacher. Jesus does the most difficult thing for those of us born into the unfortunate privilege of dominance or prejudice. He listens and allows himself to be fundamentally changed. If your experience is anything like mine, it will be disorienting, disturbing, even perhaps traumatizing. For in that moment of transformation, we see, as I'm convinced Jesus did, the racism deeply embedded within us, planted within us by a dominant culture without our permission. David Hansen once again writes, "You see, when Jesus listened to the Syrophenician woman, he heard not only the truth of her reality, he also heard the brokenness of his own reality. Both must happen in order to confront racism. We must be able to hear the realities of the oppressed and disenfranchised as true. This, in and of itself, can be difficult for those of us who are members of a privileged race or gender, to accept a foreign reality without qualifications, to listen without interrupting, to hear without reworking their experiences into the dominant cultural narratives embedded within us. But we must also be able to hear the brokenness of our own realities and of our own stories. We must hear our own incompleteness. The problem is that it's an uncomfortable direction, which, if we have the courage to follow, will bring us face to face with our own racism. That embedded culture that rises to the top like the most vile flotsam at the most inappropriate moments. These are hard truths to swallow. But we know we can because they are not our ultimate truth. Jesus' exchange offers us perhaps the most powerful story for those of us in privileged classes as we stand against racism. It compels us to listen to the narratives of the oppressed. It requires us to listen to our own prejudice. It asks us to do the unthinkable, to own our racism and be changed by society's most marginalized. And in doing so, like Jesus, to expand the scope of our love, our ministry, our mission, as we begin to join our voices and our choices with those who cry out for freedom, for mercy, and for justice. It's a difficult task, but it's one that God has equipped us for. And I will say that this is a task that throughout my life I've engaged, and I've struggled with, and I've wrestled with, and I always thought I was good at, until Jude came into our lives. And all of a sudden, there were a whole plethora of things that I'd never seen before. I hadn't been aware of. All of a sudden, those little things that I could just brush aside, those things that are just jokes or common phrases or expectations, became real. The stories of people who cross to the other side because a 17-year-old black man is walking by them, all of a sudden weren't just stories, they were my son when he became a teenager. It's so easy to be defined completely by ourselves, by our own experiences, right? But what God calls us to is more than that. God calls us to be defined by one another, and to be defined by a deeper love and a deeper justice, one that only God can lay out, but which we can work for.